I'm Brandon Breezy. I was lead character designer and lead animator on Ezio. I guess with Ezio, things started years ago because we're always looking for fun crossovers that we can have, obviously, but not all of them get to wind up being full-fledged legends. Like we did Rayman in the past, and when we were doing Rayman, and this was before I was on with BMG, they were looking at also having Ezio as what options could be pursued with Ezio. And for the longest time when I've been here, we've had an Ezio version of Ezio in dev just as a skin. So like, okay, here's what Ezio could look like. But what do we want to do with him going forward? And this year we were looking at like, okay, what are some ways we want to increase the amount of legends we're doing in a year? Can we use a character that already exists? It would save us a little bit of dev time on designing certain aspects of the character. Obviously, Ezio is an already existing character, so we didn't have to come up with all of his design particulars, and that allowed us to have a bit shorter of a time between our last legend and this legend. So we wanted to have Ezio in Brawlhalla, and then the next step was like, okay, how can we render Ezio in the game in a way that is faithful to Ezio in his games? Mm-hmm. Obvious reference point is Rayman. Rayman has his own games, and those games are 2D, so it was very easy to be like, okay, we're just gonna take the punches and put those onto Rayman. A lot of things mapped really one-to-one with him. But with Ezio isn't really in any 2D games, so it didn't necessarily work one-to-one. So part of our job was going through and picking out what we wanted to do, how that was gonna transition over, what is the best way to render this in Brawlhalla. So I hear a lot of people would have liked Qatar orbs, but a lot of people in the community have already sussed out what our general reason for going with Sword Orb was, and that was because in the AC games, Ezio is predominantly using the sword. Sure enough, the Hidden Blade, they're an iconic weapon, everyone loves them, but when they're getting used, it's more to punctuate action, or to sneak up behind someone and, assassinate them. One of the benefits to picking Sword Orb over Qatar Orb was that we were able to say, okay, we can have the Hidden Blade now on everything. So we were looking at what do we want to do that is flavorful for Ezio as a character. And one of the things that we looked at and said, okay, obviously, the iconic thing for Ezio to do is to assassinate someone. So early on in the process, we were looking at like, okay, would it be okay for us to like perhaps as a down sword signature for him to grab and stab someone? That idea actually got nixed, but we did try to maintain that mechanically because we still felt like the up close in your face kind of doing something grapple-y is a very Assassin's kind of thing to have. So that is the effective origin of the downsword, is that we wanted to preserve that, but keep it within our rating group. Winding a little bit, we throw up a whole board of concepts, right? Where we have like, oh, here's things that we see Ezio doing in the games. Here's this, here's that. Like, oh, he's parkouring, he's slashing and then comboing with his Hidden Blade, and he's doing this, that, and the other. Ezio in particular had a lot of different weapons, so we wanted to try and preserve the feel of him having an armory and stuff. So some of that we can't do because we already have a variety of weapons in the game, and we have to make sure that when we're doing things with those weapons, with extra weapons, they're not seeming to be weapons that already exist in the game. For instance, Ezio, he uses a crossbow a lot in the Assassin's games, and you can't really have a crossbow be in one of his signatures because then someone might mistake that for being an actual bow because we have an actual bow in the game. So this one was our original concept piece for what I was just talking about, where the down sword, where originally we were like, okay, he's gonna come up, grab someone, get him in the back, and then, we're playing around with the follow-ups and saying like, okay, maybe like very common in the Assassin's game for you to just kick someone over a ledge. Like, okay, can we incorporate the ledge kicking in here? And I think, personally, I think that would have made the SIG a lot better if you could just kick and have them fall under gravity. But our first attempt at animating that, it was nixed.
Okay. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. Was that you censoring it?
So, unfortunately, we deemed some of these moves that I concepted just a little too much for our rating bracket, as I was saying. So, since the previous form of the down sig that was being proposed was too violent, this was my second concept for the move, which is closer, obviously, to what it wound up being. We said, okay, we do a slash, and he follows it up with a grab, and he does a slam. This is a little different flavor-wise, but like I was saying, we wanted to try and preserve the actual mechanic up close. We're going to do some kind of grab and reposition of the opponent, and this is where I landed at. This actually we get this to the point now where, like, okay, we've got the concept, we're agreeing that the concept is probably going to work, so we're moving that into the rig, where when I do this up with what I should explain is we call this character that you're seeing here Brawl Boy. He's our little he's our test dummy, as it were, that we animate everything with, and then when we transfer it to the game, the art assets get swapped out and he becomes Ezio. So this was actually the signature that required the least work.
Okay.
I think it's one of the cooler ones. This is Ezio's down orb, where he leaps forward, does the pose, and then does the stab downwards, which is very iconic from the Assassin's game. I should say, when we were working on Rayman, again, it was easy to bring over his stuff and have him still seem like Rayman, because all his stuff was already 2D. So they're like, okay, Rayman's got his iconic punch, Rayman's got his iconic twirly hat thing. What are the iconic things that Ezio can do that will evoke the games he's from and the things that he does in his games? And again, one of them was the trying to stab in the back. It was maybe a little too violent, but one of the ones that actually worked was what I called the signature leap. Various concepts here are going to have more grabs and less grabs in them, because we were playing around, again, as you pointed out, Ezio being a more grapply character because he's more up in your face doing the Assassin's thing. That can be a little tough to do in Brawlhalla. Obviously, we have some characters that are more grabby than others, but we did already have one move that we definitely wanted to have be more grabby, and that was the down sword. Right. So our effects work here is, okay, so if we just had him slow down without anything near him, you'd probably be looking at it and going, he's just floating there? What's going on? So there's a concept in art called reference birds, where if you have something that's going on that you're not quite sure that the audience is going to be able to read, you throw in a couple birds for reference. So if you're like, oh, I'm drawing something really big and I needed to show up as really big, because when you look at a picture, it's hard to tell if something's big or not. There's a couple birds in there, you can definitely tell how big it is. So it's like, okay, we take this concept and we apply it to the slow-mo.
Okay.
And we say, okay, when the birds are coming up, the birds, they're good. Everyone knows how fast a bird flaps or doesn't flap or is moving around at speed, So when the bird slows down, it's like, oh, okay, the bird going slow is in slow-mo. As a revision to the previous birds, it's like, okay, maybe that's not necessarily enough to show when the slow-mo is happening, because the important thing to know about the slow-mo with the down orb is that it's a charge. So normally, most Brawlhalla signatures, they'll charge like right at the start. You'll do like with a little windup. So occasionally we'll have a move like the down orb here that has a delayed charge. So we have an initial action that moves Ezio into the air, and then we have the charge. So you're completely controlling how long that goes for. And it's very important to communicate that the player is indeed charging. The person controlling Ezio needs to know that it's charging, and the person playing against Ezio would love to know that it's charging.
They're charging.
So it's a little bit of fairness on both ends of things. We're like, okay, we want to make sure it's very clear that this is what's happening. So the flavor of what's going on here is like, the animus that Desmond in the future is playing back his memories is what's going on in the Assassin's games. So the animus is slowing things down, so you get a better look at what's going on.
Okay.
And very often the animus effects are like, we have a lot of light squares going on in the grid formation, so the Ezio is being slowed down by some of that grid. This is actually one of the moves that we were able to take directly from the AC games. This concept courtesy of Metagame Mike. I believe this one's directly from Revelation. It's literally slice and then a pop with the Hidden Blade gun.
Oh, okay.
Which is an extra functionality that the Hidden Blade has in the later games. We wanted to make sure we had some representation for the Hidden Blade gun in the game. And we managed to squeeze that into a couple spots. I think side sword and neutral orb are the places we managed to do that. One of the reasons we went with a more straightforward concept here is that we were doing some really wonky things with some of the other SIGs. Both of the down SIGs in particular are kind of out there, not necessarily something we're doing every day in the rest of Brawlhalla. So we wanted to make sure I threw players a bone here and had the side SIGs be fairly straightforward. Yeah, Mike was on point for both of the side SIGs here.
Okay.
I think at a point we were cross-pollinating and messing with each other's work as we got later on in the process. But initially it was like, okay, here, Mike, I got these SIGs and you'll have these SIGs. And the way that broke down in this case was like I did the concepts for 4 SIGs and Mike had concepts for 2 SIGs. So it's like, okay, we'll split up. You do those, I'll do these, and then we'll come back and we'll see how we're doing.
An Ezio clone does a slashy slash.
We wanted to keep these a little simple for the side ones, but this one was a little more complicated, and I think winds up being the better SIG of the 2 side SIGs. Spoiler warning on this one here. One of Ezio's signature moves from the end of AC2 gets in a fight with the Pope. As part of his battle with the Pope, he uses the Apple of Eden to create a bunch of clone bodies of himself.
Oh, okay.
So that's an iconic moment from the series, and we're talking about keeping iconic things from the games, carrying them over into Brawlhalla in a recognizable fashion. Having him do some kind of clone attack with the Apple of Eden seemed like an obvious thing to do. Here in the concept, you can see that, like, okay, we made sure he was, just for testing, he was bright yellow. And the initial trajectory here is a little different than how things wound up in game. One of the things we were concerned about going forward with this SIG was making sure, and this goes for other, we have other SIGs where we've done pseudo clone characters like with Jiro. We want to make sure there's no confusion between which character is the controlled character and which character-looking character is, in fact, not the character. Where in the Assassin's games, it is literally just a complete clone of the character, but that doesn't necessarily work when we bring it over to Brawlhalla because, we don't want it to be confusing which character you're trying to attack and which character you can't attack, right? Especially with the size of the hitbox that wound up being on this one, they're pretty specific. We wanted to make sure no one was going to be confused. This was, in fact, the crossbow example I was talking about earlier, where it's like, okay, we had an initial move for N-Orb that we did that didn't necessarily work out. So when we came back to the drawing board, we were like, okay, well, what are some simple ways to shore up what would be a good neutral signature for? So the second concept there was the Animus Freeze, where again with we like this one because it was similar to the Down Orb, which we knew we wanted to have signature leap. This was dealing in the same visual space where it's like, okay, he has that square that comes over him to slow him down. So, okay, what if instead of the square is being used on him, that animus effect is now being used on the opponent? This is in terms of animation, this is a fairly simple move. When I was roughing it out, I think actually this one wound up being one of the most impressive looking finished SIGs. But for the initial concept, it's like, okay, we got a hitbox up here to the right, and the motion is just rig going forward and hitting that with a follow-up to send the opponent. The only thing that I really had to be worried about here was communicating when the hits are happening and in what directions the hits are sent. This was the genesis of Neutral Sword.
Okay.
Because so as I was saying earlier, we were like, okay, we're playing with having a lot of grappling attacks for Ezio since he's all up close and personal, right? This was maybe like the most complicated one that we concepted up for that. This didn't necessarily get beyond the concepting phase. Whenever we're taking a lot of control of the opponent, we're always concerned about how long we're taking away control for. Okay, what if Ezio just jumped off of his head and knocked them to the ground and then stabbed them? Like, that would have been a very, very complicated move that wrested control from the opponent. So we looked at this, we're like, okay, we like the general anti-air hit area that we're going for here. So we played with that going forward with this SIG instead of necessarily doing the exact concept. It was still going for the same hit area, but we're trying to have it not be as complicated as the concept may be initially showing. Part of the thought here was, okay, if we want to preserve some of the grab sense that was going on, okay, we're going to have a bunch of consecutive hits at the same time, right? Could do that. I think we were thinking, like, okay, if we want to preserve the grapple to the ground aspect, you could go, okay, we have a slash, and then another slash carrying it more towards the ground. I think we decided that was maybe a little too much on sword, because obviously the down sword is a thing that is already sending the opponent into the ground a little bit. If I'm doing a different SIG, we would like it to do a different thing. We want to have your different SIGs have different uses. This is a fun one, right? So remember how earlier I was saying that Ezio we had around in dev as a skin for a very long time.
Yeah.
This is, in fact, on the left here. On my left, maybe the chat's right, that side, that one over there.
Wait, so this one?
This one that I'm pointing to.
The one above you.
Yeah, the one above me
Okay.
is, in fact, old Ezio. That is the initial concept Ezio skin that we did and shared with Ubisoft back in the day. Mm-hmm. And that was, in fact, in the game, in the game on the development side, when I got brought on to BMG several years ago.
Yeah.
So it's very fun. My initial criticism upon seeing that in the development environment was like, man, wouldn't it be nice if Ezio wasn't just a skin?
That'd be so cool.
And then here, years down the line, I'm bringing Ezio just all the way through into a legend. It was fun to do. Yeah. Funny behind the scenes thing on that. In the AC games, Ezio totally has the Da Vinci flying machine going on. I did have a concept for, like, okay, what if this was a funny, like, neutral SIG to do? Metagame Mike was all over that SIG.
He's like, oh, you said wings.
But yeah, birds, man. Birds are cool.